It was a beautiful sunny weather outside. The sun was shining brightly, in the rays of which a huge, incredibly beautiful white castle shone. Birds were flying everywhere, circling in the sky. However, not everyone was so happy on this day. The poor servant was sweating from nerves and fatigue, because the young master was going crazy again, laughing at the whole mansion. The blonde man knocked on the door that smelled of gold and told the young gentleman to hurry up, because the ceremony was about to begin. On the other side of the door, a young blonde man replied that he knew and would come very soon. The young man stood in front of the mirror and praised himself. He was the second son of the Golden Lion family, the youngest count in the empire and the proud disciple of the late sword master. What a handsome man he is. Let all the girls in the kingdom hold on, for he is coming, the future star of the Cologne Empire. And from today on, he, Xi Wei Jinshi, is the lord of the Falcon County, and definitely needs to get along with all the locals, because, on the streets of the city, the knights were in full arms, going to kill the lord at all costs to avenge the goddess Zoya. They should not let him get away with all his atrocities that he committed with young girls. In front of Xi Wei, a girl lay completely bound, with ears on her head. Her hands were tied behind her back, and the young man, holding a thick rope in his hands, asked her if her hands hurt. The knights were shouting at him outside to get out. They shouted to each other and reassured each other that if they suddenly died today, they would immediately be able to resurrect. The lord's servant had already been killed and was lying senseless while the others made their way to the castle, with only one purpose, to kill his lord. In the end, the blonde man was hanging naked on a rope in the square. Someone from the crowd shouted that this young man was in business. They had never seen such a nasty and arrogant boss. A wet man who didn't appreciate someone else's life. He's ruined so many girls, it's just awful. And Saint Zoe, a blonde of incredible beauty, preferred only suicide rather than continue to live after the shame. One of the knights, a dark-haired man who led the army, announced to everyone that he would confiscate the weapon of the crime. And then he took the sword and slashed at the suspended guy. This is for him for desecrating the holy goddess Zoya. Suddenly, the brunette stopped because he felt that something was wrong. Some strange ripples appeared, and he immediately found himself in another place. There were stone heights and new buildings everywhere. In one of the apartments, in the bedroom, a guy was lying. His clothes were lying on the floor, near the strange dome in which the brunette was lying. This electric camera seemed to be beating with an electric current. Everything was sparkling. The young man suddenly woke up and screamed with all his might. And apparently, under high voltage, he was just electrocuted. The camera stopped glowing and smoke poured out from inside. The brunette seemed to be sucked somewhere into another dimension or something like that. Everything was glowing with colorful ribbons. His body was spiraling. The next moment, the christening of the young prince was taking place in the holy church. The king held a baby wrapped in white sheets in his arms and thanked the Lord for giving him another beautiful healthy son. And while the baby was groaning and crying, the king decided to call him Xi Wei. The blonde man exhaled heavily, spread his hands to the sides and said that the boy who killed the devil eventually became the devil himself. And who would have thought that he would be the boss in the game Continent Kane? The guy folded his hands in a prayer gesture and promised God that he would definitely become a good lord, while shedding bitter tears. He certainly does not want to repeat the fate of the last lord in any way. Suddenly, the system became active. A notification came out that the activation was successful, and the strongest system of villains was at the young man's service. Xi Wei Jinshi put his hands on the blue tablet and chased it away because he didn't need any system. However, she did not obey and notified that the new player would arrive tomorrow. The host who must die according to the plot of the game. Is he sure of his decision to abandon the game? The young man asked to wait a minute and asked, what does must die mean? And then the system replied that according to the destined fate, Xi Wei Jinshi, the owner cannot change the ending of the game in which he will be killed. And if he does not use the help of this program. The young man said that in the last game the Lord was killed because he was doing all sorts of bad things here. But if he is a good person, then no one will touch him here. The system reminded the guy that the owner is not able to somehow change the predestined. The master can only improve his strength with the help of the system, and then change his future with the help of the system. Xi Wei had to put up with what he had just been told, and eventually the system was connected. After a couple of seconds, the system said that the owner needed to complete a number of villainous missions. For example, desecration of a saint, massacre of players, collecting cat girls, and much more in that spirit. And with each completed task, he will receive different rewards. The guy imagined for a second how he was lying on a chic sofa and beautiful girls were curling around him. He suddenly realized that it was really worth it to go down the villainous path. But suddenly Xi Wei realized that something was wrong here. After all, if he did the same thing as the last lord, wouldn't all this bring his demise closer? The system replied that if the host refuses the task, he will not receive any rewards. In this case, the system can predict only 3 outcomes. The first one is that he will be castrated by some player. The second is that he will be forcibly turned into a lolia. And the third, he will die, and the system will be able to screw up. The guy got very angry. Was she just mocking him? Xi Wei she told his servant that they needed to go, and he bowed in agreement. After some time, the blonde man was riding his beautiful horse among a crowd of citizens on a city street, and his subject was riding behind him. People whispered to each other, looking at the new lord. All in the little boy stood among the crowd and pointed his finger up, looking at strange uncles and beautiful cans. However, his mother corrected him and said that they were actually knights in armor. There was also a blonde girl in a pink dress in Talia, who recalled that recently she was melting from the attention of the new lord and was ready to spend a wonderful night with him. Then the young man gallantly put a lock of her hair behind her ear. Xi Wei she was very tense, and it seemed to people that he was not very happy with what was happening now. The young man looked down at the boy and his mother and did not understand what was wrong with the two of them, because who would be happy to become the Lord of Death? After a while, Xi Wei stood in the square with his baton raised while the crowd cheered and shouted. After all this solemn part was over, the young man fell on his royal bed and exhaled heavily. He was so tired of such a large crowd of people and pretense. The ceremony was infinitely long, too noisy and pompous. All this has tired him so much. But thank all the gods, now he can relax and have a good rest. Suddenly, the guy lying on the bed seemed to be thrown into the air, and a new notification came from the system about the daily villainous task, which the guy seemed to have forgotten about. For some reason, this made Xi Wei very angry, and he asked the system if it could stop all this immediately. She appears like a ghost out of nowhere and immediately disappears into nowhere. The system missed all this by and notified that the first villainous task for a guy is to steal a delicious lollipop from a small child. The second task for him is to trample the beds thoroughly. The third villainous task is to hang and severely beat one local. When all the messages ended, Xi Wei asked if she really wanted to say that all this would help. If he performs all these tasks, then he will look more like a street hooligan than a lord. The system replied that all these tasks are intended for beginners. There will be no such ease for him in the future. Therefore, he should enjoy while he can. And a small reminder for him, when completing one mission, the owner can get a lottery ticket from him. And when completing all 3, artifacts or abilities that increase the effectiveness of a critical strike. Before drawing the lottery, it is recommended to complete all 3 tasks. Xi Wei realized that there are rewards for completing all tasks. But to be honest, he is even disgusted and sickened to look at the system. So let him have a conscience. He's not trying to deceive her. But couldn't she not appear out of nowhere and scare him so much more? And even more so other people around. He, if she does not guess, can become a stutterer. So what will people think? He's a lord no matter how. The system replied that it was exclusive, and only the owner can see her. Also, the owner can contact the system with the help of his thoughts, so he did not necessarily have to raise his voice to it. Later, Xi Wei descended the outer stairs of the castle while his servant polished the sword. He raised his dark head at the lord who was passing by, and he called him to walk through the accountable territory. Soon they saddled their horses and raced towards the city. The blonde man laughed insidiously, while the man and the rest of the guards did not understand the reason for this behavior of the young man. Then they met a little boy who was in the square a little earlier, and he also recognized him. Xi Wei smiled sweetly, and said that now that the kid knows exactly who he is, will he be a good boy and listen to him. And when he received a positive response from the baby, he politely asked if he would give him the candy that he was holding behind his back. However, the kid did not want to part with the candy and therefore confidently replied that he would not give it away. Then Xi Wei menacingly ordered to give him the candy quickly, and the baby cried bitterly and shouted to the whole street that the Lord wanted to steal his candy. Xi Wei told him not to cry. Now he will give him his candy and then he will bring him 2 whole ones. Not a bad deal. And then suddenly an alert popped up that the system wasn't as stupid as he thought, and it is not so easy to fill it, so he will have to take this candy away properly. The guy thought with despair that it would not be so easy for him here, and he just had to take a lollipop from a poor child who began to cry and yell at the whole neighborhood more than ever that the Lord had brought a bunch of uncles and cans with him and was now offending small children. The blonde man walked past his guards and ordered them to follow him. Licking the lollipop, the young man thought that this was just a shitty task. What could be more shameful than making him molest children? A little later, on the field, under the scorching sun, there was a half-naked man with stubble, who undressed from the heat. He had a scythe on his shoulder and was smiling contentedly. It looks like there will be a very good harvest this year. But then he saw that the new lord was simply trampling all his crops and tearfully began to ask him to stop. The guards and the servants stood a little to the side and looked at all this with horror. They also didn't understand why the lord was behaving so strangely and terribly. After finishing destroying the harvest, Xi Wei notified the guards that they were done with everything here. A man in only trousers was sitting on the ground, holding something in his hands that made him very happy. Xi Wei turned around and mentally laughed at the stupid system, because he would be able to find loopholes everywhere. And what would she do to him now? After that, the guy was sitting on a horse and thought that he had already figured out the first 2 tasks. But what should he do with the third? To hang and kill a man. Xi Wei drove up to the square where some poor merchant was selling unhappy girls. They were the best slaves and he would even make a discount on the first girl. Looking at the man in front of him, Xi Wei thought that he was the perfect candidate. After a while, the merchant was already tied to the pole with ropes, while the servant told him that their new lord had issued a decree according to which people and half people are obliged to live in peace and on equal rights. And from now on, illegal sex trafficking will no longer flourish in this city of Lindun. The girls who were freed from the clutches of a malicious merchant were immensely grateful to the kindness of the new lord. He's so nice and good-natured. It's lucky for the whole city that he became the new lord. Among the crowd stood a young brunette, half-human. She was holding a hiking backpack behind her back, looking furtively around. Meanwhile, people were rejoicing over their new kind and beautiful lord. When it was all over and Xi Wei returned to the palace, he slammed the doors of his room, threw off his cape and ordered the system to give him rewards for all the villainous tasks he had completed. It was not in vain that he worked. The guy poured himself a glass of red wine and waited for the notification. Soon the system discovered that the owner had completed all the daily villainous tasks, and now he could start the lottery. The blue circle began to spin and the arrow stopped at the cell where it was shown that the owner receives a beautiful armor plate armor of the Dragon Slayer. All 3 possibilities of absolute luck are collected, and the owner received the heroic armor return of the saint. Looking at his awards, Lord Xi Wei was just beside himself with happiness. He was ready to kiss the system for such gifts. The young man began to try on outfits and show off himself in front of the mirror. He urgently needs to find someone to try out the new thing. A little later, Xi Wei Jinshi came to the training ground where his servant was training. He did not expect that the Lord would come to such a place. Was the guy just looking for him? The Lord replied to Clement that he had received a good armor as a gift and now he needed to try them out in action. After examining the blonde from head to toe, the man was shocked to say that this armor is much more than just not bad. They shine so well in the sun. Clement went a little further and said that in this case, the humble servant of the Lord is ready to help him try out his new beautiful armor, and made a respectful bow. Before the fight, the young man also made a bow, because that's how it should be, and Clement took off from his seat. Xi Wei noticed that his servant was very fast and he realized that this was the real power of the former warrior. They both clashed swords in a fight and Clement flew back, but still managed to stay on his feet. The man said that the young master's strength had indeed increased significantly. The guy was full of energy and a puddle and told Clement to melt again. And again, they fought, swinging their swords back and forth. And so it was already night. Xi Wei and Clement were sitting near the table. The blonde man was drinking from a mug to quench his thirst. Clement suddenly said that when the young master's new armor complements his own fighting spirit, his defense really increases several times. Xi Wei smiled and said that it was all thanks to the man. The half-girls praised the new lord so much that he is so good. He is so beautiful and wonderful. In the dream, Xi Wei called his knights and told them all to attack him to test his strength. He was able to defeat everyone with ease. He was lying on the bed and smiling at the fact that he was omnipotent. At this time, the brunette was still lying in his capsule, connected to it by wires. On the glass screen, he saw the trailer for the game Continent Kane. The Lord woke up in his bed. He was still in his tunic. He sat down and suddenly had the feeling that someone was watching him. Although perhaps it just seemed to him. The system suddenly sent an alert that a new player would arrive in Chenguang City very soon. The guy didn't understand anything. Xi Wei pointed his finger at the screen and pressed enter. Meanwhile, somewhere there was an explosion and a huge dragon tore the lights out of its mouth. A girl in armor who was hidden from the fire under a large dome and shouted to the god of war and flame that it was against all rules to start a war with lower gods. The girl turned out to be the lowest deity of the wild, the goddess Malorn. Rules and order are the weakness of everything. The dragon grabbed the girl with his paw. He was a mid-level deity, a god of war and flame, a flaming dragon. Trying to escape from the clutches, the girl promised that she would definitely return. The dragon asked what use it would be then. Their deity had perished, and the demi-human race that she had guarded so strongly and carefully would soon be completely destroyed. At that time, the city square was very crowded. Everyone was hurrying about their business. There were a lot of merchants. A man in a black raincoat, behind which not even a face could be seen, handed the guy with a ponytail a blue crystal that glowed brightly. He said that with this crystal, he would gain the ability to summon spirits. He will be able to summon spirits and then lead an army and be able to save all the demi-humans. It's time to put an end to this era. Oppression and oppression of inhumans. Lord Xi Wei sat with his hand touching his neck and realized that playing for the first time, he should not have skipped the dialogues that were connected with the Lord. He remembered only fragments of what and how. Driving a flying horse and carriage, the man who was sitting in front asked the young gentleman how he was, and he replied that he was fine. It all seemed very strange to Xi Wei, because it seems like when the goddess of wildlife was on the verge of death, she gathered the remnants of her powers into a mysterious crystal, which then ended up in the hands of the main character of the game. This mysterious crystal is the equivalent of a game magazine, and the main character calls with the help of a spirit crystal, which is the player. When he went through this game as a player, nothing seemed strange to him in the very plot of the game. However, now, if you carefully consider and think about everything, this is no longer a game, but a real world. So could it be that something like this happened in the real world? Then what deity called him here? Did it help him with the system? And what is its purpose? He is Xi Wei Jinshi, was chosen as worthy to become a pawn of the gods, and it's really a great honor for him. Returning to the flying carriage, Clement told young Mr. Xi Wei that he had one question. All this is extremely unlike him. Why did he decide to get up so early and go to Chenguang, which is located on the border of the Falcon region? The young man thought with a smile that of course he was doing this because he valued his life, but he answered out loud that he just wanted to look at the territories under his control. As they say, it is better to warn than to correct later, and Chenguang chose as a starting point, because that's where they will start their journey. Clement was glad that young Mr. Xi Wei was so prudent. He is sure that people will be happy and will give him every support. The man hoped that by the time of arrival, the young man would not experience a strong shock. Xi Wei didn't understand what all this meant. Was there some kind of surprise waiting for him? When they arrived in the city, the young man asked, what did the last lord do in general? No matter how barren the land is, and no matter how far the city is from the capital, how can you manage to bring everything to this? Just incredible stuff. Clement replied to the young gentleman that the former lord came from a family of indestructible. His name was Count Callant. He was also a fanatic of Yanlong Bard, and therefore, while he held this post, he was busy fighting all the time. The last lord practically did not deal with his lands. The blonde got angry for some reason and asked the man if he meant the same old man who was constantly crushing the forehead. The servant replied that, in fact, this territory was not yet so large that it was necessary to move on a griffin within its limits. Xi Wei Jinshi asked with embarrassment, did he really have to thank that old man for expanding the territories? Suddenly, Xi Wei heard that someone was going to be killed. Looking around the corner, the blonde saw that some hooligan was mocking a half-girl, and asked to call her stupid brother. She's just like her dumb brother. Therefore, they must disappear. The poor girl was sitting on the ground. She was in torn clothes and crying bitterly. Among the brown hair on her head, 2 ears stuck out. The boys beat up the poor girl because they thought she was useless. A girl with white hair and a raincoat, who was standing nearby, cursed. She wanted to help, but the guy stopped her because he said that in that case everyone would recognize her. The girl struggled out of his grasp, because if you don't help the poor girl, she will simply die. The guy replied that they should wait until all the other heroic spirits gather, and only then they will be able to free all the inhumans in the city. Does she want to save just one girl or all the others too? The blonde wanted to say something, but she was interrupted by a loud exclamation. Xi Wei Jinshi shouted to the boys to immediately stop bullying the poor girl. Then he approached one of the offenders and hit him on the 5th point to punish him properly for everything he does here. This brat has not even dried the milk on his lips yet, and he already dares to offend others here. Now the new lord will show him a real fatherly upbringing. The boy shed bitter tears while he received a soft spot. The girl told the guy with the ponytails that they needed to go and wait. Here, everyone will be able to figure it out without their help. Xi Wei picked up the girl. Her legs were all skinned and in wounds. Her clothes were torn almost everywhere. The system suddenly notified the blonde that a significant player had been discovered somewhere nearby, and the system has been successfully updated. Then the system asked the guy if he wanted to know what was new. Xi Wei was surprised that the system can also be updated. and he was interested in learning something new. The system made a sound and congratulated the Lord on the fact that he now has a new function: visualization of information data. The young man did not quite understand what it was. Could he really see other people's personal information now? The system replied that now the host can see most of the information of the target, the level of which is lower or corresponds to his own, and approximate information of the target than the level above. The system demonstrated what the information on the guy himself might look like. His name was written there, his status was Lord of the Falcon County, Count. His strength is an Earth Knight, level 43. His abilities are the famous Barrier, Fearless Attack, Lion Strike, Ultimate Will, possession of a sword of legendary level. Equipment, Heroic Armor, Return of the Saint, Two-Handed Sword of the Glorious Lion. The guy's reputation in Cologne is 999. His prestige among the Inhumans is 66, but the prestige among other people is low. After reviewing all the data about himself, Xi Wei thought, who would have thought that he would be so popular? This arrow means that his reputation continues to grow. Passing by his servant with a girl in his arms, Xi Wei met his uncomprehending gaze. Meanwhile, the system was able to provide the guy with all the information about Clement. He was the Count's personal servant, as everyone already knew. He was a level 49 Earth Knight. There was no information about his abilities and equipment. The reputation in Cologne is 13,721, which means that he is a very respected person. Prestige among non-humans 1. Looking at the last 2 points, the Lord was surprised. Less could not be expected from this man, and his reputation is even higher than that of the guy himself. Lord Xi wondered if there were other functions he didn't know about yet. And is it possible to update the system again and add all the functions at once? The system immediately congratulated the owner on acquiring the Fetters of Fate function. Now the owner will receive a chain of fate every time he changes the ending, which in the original should lead to his death. The next storyline, which should end with the death of the owner, is the abduction and desecration of Saint Zoya. While the guy put the rescued girl in his carriage, he thought about the shackles of fate. What the hell? It even sounds so. The system has issued a new alert that the chain of fate can be used to seal certain branches of the Destiny Child. After the complete sealing, the Destiny Child can be killed. Yihao's real Destiny Child, the 5 branches of destiny. In other words, if Xi Wei Jinshi can avoid death as many as 5 times, then he automatically defeats this Yihao. The system suggested considering the specifics of the host's behavior. First, the host should not attack the main character Yihao as a child of fate, protected by the rules of the game. If he suddenly thoughtlessly decides to attack, then this may lead to the early disclosure of his identity, causing the collapse of the storyline of the world. Second, the host can attack the player if he suddenly threatens his life. The host must do everything possible to suppress the player's development. And third, with the exception of what is prescribed in the first paragraph, the owner has absolute sovereignty and is free to do anything. After analyzing all the above points, Xi Wei Jinshi realized that with the exception of the first condition, all the others are aimed at expanding his powers. As the main villain in the game, how can he kill his antagonists when they haven't even really gotten stronger yet? The first storyline has already been unlocked and the host can monitor the progress using his system panel. And if he has calculated everything correctly and is not mistaken, then the next one should be like this. Saint Zoe, with the help of Yihao and heroic spirits, will begin to rescue and liberate Inhumans everywhere. And when the heroic spirits rescued one beastman from the hands of a vile slave owner, they disturbed one of the guards. Then the guards planned to immediately capture the goddess of the Inhumans and sacrifice her to the Lord. That's how they ran into Yihao and the others back then. And so, in the end, the army of heroic spirits won. Yihao and Zoe captured Chen Guang, occupying the border territory of the Lord at the same time. The Lord thought, are these bastards stirring up something right under his nose? Although, unfortunately, he can't do anything to the main character, but at the expense of other players. Xi Wei smiled maliciously from his own brilliant idea about revenge. A little later, the young Lord Xi Wei Jinshi arrived at the Zhengcheng residence. When he approached the gates of the beautiful palace with his faithful servant Clement, the guards stopped them and asked who they were. But then the guards saw on the Lord's chest the sign of the golden lion that was sewn to his keel, and the man on duty nervously began to think who this young man was. Is he a man from the Empire or some kind of lord? The man's name was Gudabai, and he was the head of the Chengyuan City Guard. His strength is a mid-level blade master, level 13. Abilities, Whirlwind Strike, Heroic Strike. Equipment, Guard's Armor, Guard's Sword. Reputation in Cologne is 31. But prestige among people is 6. Gudabai got down on one knee in front of the young lord, bowed his head in a respectful bow, and introduced himself to the noble gentleman as Captain Chen Guang of the city guard. And then I asked the Lord if he could help him in any way. Looking at the captain of the city guard, Xi Wei and she thought that this man was very talented. He remembers that he has only 2 skills in the plot, but Beauties was able to combine them perfectly. In this storyline, the captain of the city guard heroically dies at the hands of the player, which leads to the appearance of a small boss, the chief of the city of Magilla. Returning to reality from his deep thoughts, the young lord asked the captain to call the chief of the city, and he, awkwardly hesitating and scratching his shaggy head, replied that at the moment the chief was very busy. And that's when Xi Wei walked past him and said that then he would find this boss himself. Beauties was discouraged by such an action, but did not contradict the gentleman. At this time, this same chief of the city, a stout and mustachioed man in a suit, was sitting on a green velvet sofa surrounded by 2 charming ladies in revealing outfits, who did what men stroked all over their bodies. The brunette, who was sitting on the right hand in a white bodysuit, asked the man how he was feeling. At this time, Xi Wei burst into his hall, abruptly opening the doors. The man immediately shouted who dared to break into his office. He's definitely not a tenant. Doesn't he see that the boss is too busy with important things? Then this same boss suddenly fell to his knees abruptly, because he realized that the most respected Mr. Xi Wei Jinshi was standing in front of him. His dear master, his humble servant, prayed for his health day and night, and here he is at last. The Lord could have informed him in advance that he was planning to visit, and then the man would have been able to prepare better. Meanwhile, Xi Wei, who towered over this moustached man, found out that he had only 2 simple skills. Is this really the local boss? While he was pouring tears and snot, the system found out that this man's name is Mejil, and he is, in fact, the chief of the city of Chenguang. His strength is a level 22 knight. Abilities: instant attack, stabbing. Equipment: craft finished armor, ancestral sword. His reputation in Cologne is 352, and his prestige among the Inhumans is 37. Having finished his tears, the man began to suck up to the young lord this way and that, offering to tell him about the affairs in their glorious town. According to the boss, everything has been quiet and peaceful lately. The lord laughed, which interrupted the man. And then suddenly he got angry and called the man a complete idiot who does not even see that Inhumans are already breaking into his house, and he is sitting on his couch in the company of girls and does not even know about it. And now he is temporarily suspended from the post of the head of the city, and Xi Wei himself will take his place and fix everything. Will restore order. Meanwhile, the man will become the captain of the guard and will consider the effectiveness of his work. And as soon as he realizes everything, then he will find the Lord and he will restore him to his post. The man was so nervous about being properly scolded like that, but he simply had no other choice. Having finished his business in this castle and having seen everything that he should and should not, the young Lord Xi Wei Jinshi was rapidly heading for the exit from the territory, while the boss ran after him and tried to convey to the gentleman that everything he offered was a little inappropriate. However, the Lord asked, "Isn't the man here to guard him?" Meanwhile, the captain of the guard stood and listened to what Xi Wei told him, and the boss. No matter what was happening in the city, the captain should properly perform his direct duties. A stout man, along with the captain of the guard, clung to the legs of the blonde and shouted that it was impossible. The captain was roaring for the reason that if the boss becomes the captain of the guard, then what will he have to do in this case? Xi Wei said that then the captain would be his personal bodyguard, and he would double his salary. Beauties immediately cheered up and said that he would do everything possible and impossible to protect the young master. Xi Wei immediately asked him to arrange for a room to be prepared for him, and preferably with a large bed. And the young man himself was already sitting astride a horse, holding the girl. Looking at how the new lord was leaving his domain, the owner of the city frowned and realized that it wasn't all because he hadn't prepared a welcome gift for the new lord. Yes, he just sympathizes with Inhumans, and he behaved so majestically and haughtily with him. To brighten up his bad mood, Mejil ordered him to immediately find a couple of more attractive non-human girls and deliver them to the master's chambers. Beauties at first wanted to call the man the boss, but then corrected himself and said captain. The new captain of the guard was ready to regain his rightful position at any cost, and no arrogant kid will be able to stand in his way. Xi Wei stood over the lying girl and thought what kind of animal she was. If he understood everything correctly, then the girl must be a squirrel. He was thinking about her beautiful ponytail, which, judging by its appearance, should be incredibly soft and fluffy. And these moving ears. The girl suddenly opened her eyes and sighed heavily. Xi Wei was very happy that she finally got up. After examining what she was lying on, The girl sincerely apologized to the young lord for soiling his bedclothes, and she certainly doesn't know how she got there. The girl quickly fell to her knees in front of the young man and began to beg him not to kill her. Xi Wei she put his hands out in front of him to somehow let her know that she was hasty with her conclusions and asked her to calm down first. Meanwhile, she covered herself with her hands as if he was going to hit her. Is the girl really so afraid of him? Is he that scary? The guy cleared his throat and asked why Mu was tearing her up. He saved her on the contrary. If she can remember everything as it was, then some guys bullied her, and she lost consciousness and the blonde drove the hooligans away and took her with him. The girl said that her name was Lori, and that she remembered everything. But she didn't lose consciousness because of them. She's just starving. A little later, the poor girl was eating for both cheeks everything that the Lord had prepared for her. She ate both rolls and bread, and with her mouth full, she told the Lord that she didn't even know how to thank him for such generosity. The young lord sitting opposite asked her to chew all the food first, and then talk calmly. Suddenly, the system discovered that the behavior of the owner does not correspond to the behavior of the villain. Therefore, he must immediately stop. Otherwise, he will be punished. The Lord asked the system not to even try to harm him, although he saved this girl. But he did it in order to make her his pawn and at a critical moment deliver the final blow to the players and the main character. The system analyzed the behavior of the host and announced that, based on the results of the analysis, it was decided that this was feasible. Updating the villain's code, there will be no more similar warnings for the Lord. The young man thought that this system was too stupid. Fortunately, he had already realized her main weakness. As long as he can somehow justify his behavior, he will be able to do whatever his heart desires. The guy received his daily update with villainous tasks. And first, you need to upset more than 10 players. Villainous task number 2 is to get Lori to massage the back and heat his bed. And finally, the villainous task number 3 is to humiliate the main character Yi Hao. As always, there is a generous reward for completing daily villainous tasks. After completing the current daily tasks, new ones will be generated, and therefore, the young man should make as much effort as possible. Xi Wei she was very dissatisfied with such tasks. Lori, who had been appetitively chewing a delicious and juicy chicken leg, stopped to look at the Lord. Seeing that he was not himself, she handed the meat to the gentleman in order to brighten up his mood. The young man sighed and said that he didn't need any food. And he asked her not to call him dear sir. He is the Count of the Falcon and his name is Xi Wei Jinshi. And by the way, she just asked how she could repay him and thank him for saving her in such a warm welcome. The guy smiled cunningly and said that he just didn't have a personal maid, and from that day on she would work for him. She will have 3 meals a day and 2 days a week she will have days off. It seemed to the new lord that this was a pretty decent offer. At this time, in the estate of a slave owner, a man was beating non-human girls with rods. Their bodies were all crippled. They begged to stop, but he received only heavenly pleasure from the fact that he had such great power over them and could just beat them whenever he wanted. One of the girls begged the man to let her go, because she has a family and children, and the man replied that then next time they would take them with them, and they would gather the whole family. Then suddenly a knight in armor came up to the man and said that he had come for slaves for the boss, so he had to hurry. The man saluted and told her that they had caught these slaves quite recently, and each of them was unique in its own way, and because he is just sure that the boss will be satisfied. Returning to the girls, the man again hit with a rope, but he was stopped by the hand of a certain young man. It turned out to be the player Lin Fan. He started asking the man if he knows that human trafficking is punishable by law. The half-naked brunette replied that they were inhumans, so it was better for him to just roll away from here. He almost forgot it was a game. Here the laws and regulations differ from those to which they are accustomed in the real world. The blonde threw a bag of coins to the man and said that he wanted to take all the slaves for himself. The brunette was very happy when he saw a whole bag of gold coins and told the esteemed client, while smiling with a snotty smile, that the data of the slave was pre-ordered for the city chief Xi Wei, but he could wait for the next batch. Hearing Xi Wei's name, the player hesitated. Wasn't Mejel the boss of their city? Has there really been some bug in the game? A gang of guys behind the blonde man pulled out their swords and ordered them to immediately lower these slaves, otherwise he would get. The man began to run away from these robbers with screams. Then Mejel himself came to the defense of the brunette. He stamped his foot hard on the ground and said that he was the chief of Chenguang City. Did they, the commoners, decide to attack his city? They should get down on their knees in front of him and just beg for mercy. Seeing that the boss of the city himself appeared before them, the robbers cursed. Does he have level 11? This is too much. They only fought with mobs of the 2nd or 3rd level, and his equipment is not even visible. The difference in strength is so great. They won't last that long if they fight him. "Where is Yi Hao?" At the mention of his name, the guy immediately appeared in the place of the arrow and summoned his divine shield. Then he summoned the heroic spirits. His team was delighted with the appearance of the guy, because with him they have a much better chance of winning this fight. Attacking the boss of the city, they rejoiced that they were doing pretty well. Apparently, this guy has very little time left, so it won't be difficult to kill him. Yi Hao delivered the final decisive blow with his big sword and it flew back. The robbers were glad that even the NPCs were supporting the players. What kind of game mechanism is this? They fought with him for half a day, and then the main character came and dealt with him in just an instant. Yi Hao came up to them, smiled and said that good always wins over evil. Mejel died because of his greed and stupidity. Fan was glad that they would also be rewarded. Why don't they go to the chief's residence right now? They won't be able to do anything if it gets dark. After some time, the guys came to the castle. Xi Wei Jinshi was standing on the visor of the entrance, with his arms folded on his chest. They wondered who he was and did not expect anyone to be here at all. The blonde man looked at them and listed what they had done, killed his servants and guards, and now they want to take his money to their dirty hands. They do what they want on his territory. Aren't they too brazen? The same gang of guys looked at the young man who was standing on the visor and could not understand who he was. Maybe another boss. Fan said that first they need to look at the general information and assess the situation, and only then decide what and how. As a result, they found out that the blonde man who stood in front of them was the new Lord Xi Wei Jinshi, an Earth Knight of level 44, a nightmare. They couldn't believe it. It had to be so wrong. And why is there a Falcon Lord at all? Shouldn't he be in Lindong? Or all these maneuvers to slow down their progress? Beginners have to fight a boss. Second level noobs against a 44 level boss. Is that even adequate? The girl who was in their company said that whatever it was, his model is so thoughtful. Yes, he is a real handsome. Lin Fan turned back and asked if they were thinking at all what they were talking about. It seemed that the guys were ready for absolutely anything for the sake of a reward, and the prospect of fighting with such a strong opponent did not frighten them so much anymore. They wondered how many coins would fall to them if they could suddenly defeat this Lord Xi Wei. Yi Hao exhaled heavily, and then introduced himself to the Falcon Lord. He said that the Lord most likely had not heard of him, but he could guarantee that he would definitely hear about him in the future, and he will remember what he is fighting for. The system has already extracted all the information on the guy at this time. The name is Yi Hao. Status: a child of fate citizen. Power is a level 11 knight, has a brilliant purification strike, an aura of glory, a divine shield, as well as the knowledge of masterful combat. Nothing is known about his abilities yet, but he had fine full armor in his equipment, which was considered good enough. In the city, they only heard about him, and the Inhumans trust him. Xi Wei Jinshi only chuckled at his level. If it wasn't for the system restriction, he would have smeared the guy right away. Taking out his sword, from which a golden dragon suddenly emerged, Xi Wei introduced himself to the horde. He was determined to make these violators pay for their ignorance. The Fire Lion ran to attack, and Yi Hao understood that his shield simply could not withstand such a large force. Isn't that the power of level 44? After some time, there was a significant hole in the ground in which this defeated gang lay. The radius of this pit is 10 meters, and the depth is 1 meter. Was it enough to upset them? The guys couldn't understand what had happened to them. At first there was some kind of explosion, and then they just blacked out. Is this exactly what's going on in the plot? Why can't they deal with the NPC? One of the guys said that he was definitely outside the territory covered by the attack, so why did he also end up in this stupid pit? Another guy started complaining that he only had 250 horsepower. This boss dealt 126, 782 damage in one hit, and it wasn't even a critical hit. Then they suddenly remembered the cool hero and started looking everywhere for Yi Hao. Where did he go? The guy with the ponytail was sitting a little further away. According to the plot, they were supposed to immediately kill the head of the city, but then where did this guy come from? Then he got to his feet and asked Lord Xi Wei if he valued his subordinates and enslaved Inhumans for his pleasure. The blonde was very surprised by such impudence. I need to clarify something to this guy. When did he enslave Inhumans? And even for your own pleasure. Yi Hao was determined to defeat the young lord after all, so he told him to prepare for a clash with justice, and he invoked the power of liberation. Xi Wei Jinshi is very happy that the guy's strength has grown very much. She has temporarily risen to level 45, one higher than the lord himself, which, in fact, was to be expected from this child of fate. And if all this had happened to the last lord, then everything would have been over long ago. Yi Hao was determined to show Xi Wei what real strength was. He's still a long way from a guy. Both youths fought with their swords like fire and ice, and it was like a real life and death battle. and then the system brought them an alert that danger was coming. The Lord needs to stop attacking Destiny's Child Yi Hao immediately. Xi Wei certainly did not expect such a turn in order. Destiny's Child used the halo of holiness and the Lord was thrown back by the powerful flow of power. Yi Hao's gang supported him in every way and shouted that he would really defeat this Lord. Nothing less was expected from the main character. Well, it can't be that at the very beginning of the game they decided to face an invincible boss. With his sword, Yi Hao is so courageous. Xi Wei Jinshi looked at these players and became more and more convinced that they were really saying everything they thought. If they knew that this was the real world, then none of them would be laughing anymore. When the enemy wanted to attack the young lord again, Xi Wei immediately called his faithful servant Clement to him. The man grappled in a fight with a guy, and Xi Wei stood on the sidelines and was snide. Yi Hao wondered why this old man, who had come from nowhere, was fighting with him instead of the Lord. Isn't this a fair duel? The system got information on Clement, which was visible to other players, and they saw that the man had level 49. He is even stronger than the Count himself, and that's how to fight him now. If he could still compete with one, then with two at once. Yi Hao asked the Lord, is this really his code of chivalry? It's such a shame. However, Xi Wei Jinshi had never heard of any code. First of all, he is a lord, second of all, an earl, and only in the third place, he is a knight. Has the guy ever seen a lord or an earl who would fight his opponent himself? Then the Lord ordered Clement to beat the opponent. In the fight, Yi Hao was convinced by his own experience that this man is really very strong. Is this the power of an Earth Knight? The main character was hit and he fell to the ground. While a small trickle of blood was flowing from his mouth, the young lord stepped on top of him. The hero asked if he would kill him already or not, but Xi Wei asked who said he was going to kill him. He took the guy by the scruff of the neck, lifted him off the ground, and then gave him a strong slap in the face that even left a red palm mark on his cheek. Then he started hitting him on both cheeks. The other players stood on the sidelines and just looked at it with their mouths open. Xi Wei asked if the guy would show him all his might and do as he said. After finishing the performance, Lord Xi got to his feet, ostentatiously brushing off his hands in snow-white gloves, and with a smile said that he was in a surprisingly good mood today, so Yi Hao could leave. And if the guy suddenly ever wants to take revenge on him, then he will be happy to wait for him. Meanwhile, Yi Hao was lying on the ground. His cheeks were still swollen from many blows, and his skin was covered with bruises and scratches with bruises. Lord Xi Wei Jinshi left with Clement, and the gang remained standing next to their leader. They realized that their main character, apparently, turned out to be so-so. They thought that once the main character, it means invincible. Although most likely, the problem was not even in the main character himself, but in his opponent, who this time turned out to be too strong even for him. What should they do next now? Is their mission a failure? Lord Xi didn't take those slaves away from them. Sitting in a griffin-drawn carriage that flew over a busy city, Lori was sitting next to the Lord, and it seemed to him that something was bothering her. So he asked what was wrong with her. Isn't he feeling really bad? The girl replied that everything was fine with her. It was just that after the death of her dad, Lori was going alone for the first time somewhere so far away. So she felt a little uneasy. The Lord stroked her head between her ears and apologized for such a question. Although now he does not have a special opportunity to resolve all conflicts and contradictions between all people and inhumans. But she definitely has nothing to worry about. As long as she is next to him, then no one in the large territory of the Falcon will dare to touch or offend her. Lori was so soft and fluffy. Meanwhile, Clement, who was flying the griffin in front, told the young gentleman that they had arrived at their destination. Getting out of the carriage, Lori said that such a luxurious residence is 100 times better than the house of the chief of the city of Magel. Lori asked her master if she would really be his personal maid, and the Lord replied that yes, he would. Her job will be to take care of him on a daily basis. And Xi Wei thought to himself, is she still doubting? After all, they came here on a griffin for half a day. The young master asked her not to worry so much, because he is certainly not like many nobles. He doesn't have many restrictions and rules. And as for the specific content of the maid's work, Chris will teach her everything within a few days. She is such a cheerful girl. He was not allowed to finish, because a girl was wrapped in a strong embrace of the Lord. A brunette, dressed as a maid, and apparently it was the same cheerful Chris. She hugged him so hard that the guy could barely breathe. She said with a smile on her lips that her young master Xi Wei had already grown so much. Then the blonde still managed to break away from her and asked, wasn't she supposed to arrive only 2 days later? Chris replied that she had heard that he had become the new lord, and I thought that it could definitely be useful to him. She was very afraid that Xi Wei would be very anxious, just like in his childhood, when he was still drinking milk. That's why she flew right here at the first opportunity. Young Lord Xi Wei asked Chris to stop because he didn't want to remember everything that happened in his childhood. He turns out to be embarrassed. Such a cutie. Xi Wei realized that his former nanny was still full of enthusiasm. It's just incredible. Remembering that he had not arrived alone, he introduced Lori to Chris and said that from now on she would be his personal maid. So Chris has to introduce her to all the responsibilities and furnishings in the house. Chris was surprised that this little girl would be his personal maid. Lord Xi Wei Jinshi said that he brought her from Chenguang because poor Lori was almost beaten to death in the alley by some local hooligans using stones and cobblestones. Therefore, he really hopes that Chris will not be too strict with her and he hopes for her understanding. Chris assured the gentleman that she understood everything perfectly and would do it in the best possible way. Teach this girl everything. Chris looked at the new girl. What a sweet and gentle squirrel she is after all. She will definitely teach her everything. There was a loud sensation in Chenguang. The main character Yi Hao is actually the villain's own son. So what's in between? Love or hate? It turns out that the Falcon Lord Xi Wei is the main character. After hearing this news, Yi Hao slammed his fist on the table in anger. In his previous life, he was a genius of ancient martial arts, and in this life, he is a hero who overthrew tyranny. But it shouldn't be like this. He's the main character. When did everything go wrong? There had never been any problems with his ability to foresee the future before, and everything that happened completely repeated the plot of what he saw. Heck, all this is happening precisely because of that new Lord Xi Wei Jinshi. Due to the fact that he somehow brazenly changes the course of all events. Now Yi Hao looks like a laughing stock in the eyes of other players. Well, nothing. Sooner or later, he will definitely tear this Lord Xi Wei into small pieces. Meanwhile, in Lindong, Lord Xi Wei was sitting at his huge dining table, looking at the cooked dishes in front of him, and pig and lobsters and a bunch of other delicious dishes. But suddenly he was chilled all over as if goosebumps ran. Suddenly it became so cold and creepy. A knight entered the dining hall, who immediately greeted his young master and reported to him that the priests refused to come and heal Lori. And his eminence also said that young Lord Xi Wei had gone mad, asking God's servant to heal a non-human who was in no way worthy of it. The blonde man put the cutlery in a plate while loudly clinking them. How dare they contradict him? He has just literally taken office, and his subordinates are already refusing to carry out his orders. No one seems to take him seriously. Even the little priests dared to afford something like that. Recently, the novices of the papal court have become even more bold and rather arrogant. The knight began to get noticeably nervous from the fact that the Lord was in such a mood, so he tried to calm him down and asked him not to be so angry. The Lord jumped up from his chair, leaning his hands on the table and shouted, "How can I not be angry? If they don't want to treat Lori by the decree of Xi Wei, then let him instruct Clement to gather cavalry and cordon off the church, and the Lord himself will come soon." The knight bowed and, folding his hand over his heart, went out to fulfill the Lord's orders. At this time, Lori was already fully dressed in maid clothes, as it should be, a black sundress with a white apron, red bows. She came up to the gentleman, glowing from the new clothes. Xi Wei Jinshi was just shocked that she was such a cutie. He himself did not expect such a result. Lori came over and asked the gentleman if she looked too strange in this outfit. Chris told her to dress like that. Xi Wei stroked her head, as usual, between the ears and cleared his throat and replied that everything was fine and she looked great. And then he informed Chris that he had urgent business and needed to leave, so she should take care of Lori. Chris asked Mr. Xi Wei not to worry. He will return in the evening and will be able to check for himself what a well-mannered and diligent maid he has. In the blonde man's hand was a strange transparent cone with a red liquid. He threw it into the hands of Lori, who was able to catch it at the last moment, and told her not to forget to drink it later. The little girl had no choice but to follow the order. While little Lori was examining this cone, Chris leaned over to her, since the girl was very, very short, and whispered in her ear that, apparently, Mr. Xi Wei liked her very much. The girl blushed and asked the mistress how it was possible. I asked her not to joke like that anymore. But did her words sound like a joke? The vital water is in her hands, and the source of life created at the palace of the Lord of the Elves is very valuable. This is the only place on the whole continent that has a healing effect. It prolongs life and heals wounds. It's just like that, or you can't buy it for money. Her 13th husband took advantage of her when he proposed to her, and it was simply impossible to refuse. When Lori heard this information, she was just in shock. Has this Chris had so many husbands? At this time, Xi Wei arrived at the divine servant. He approached the gentleman, and the system was already counting all his information. The man's name was Malton and he was the bishop of the god of war. His strength is a level 38 archmage, has a certain deity technique, sacrifice, advanced mastery of fire magic, deity technique, holy healing. The technique of the deity is the summoning of a servant. Of the equipment, he has the perfect bishop's robe, the staff of the fiery heart. His reputation among the Cologne Empire is 7324, and he is a very well-known bishop in local circles. Influence among non-humans 147. His hands are stained with the blood of inhumans. After scanning the bishop from head to toe, Xi Wei Jinshi said that regardless of the man's conceit, he did not think that he would be watching him. Suddenly, something flew past the guy. At first he didn't understand what it was. Then he noticed a gold badge with a lion, which was torn from his tunic. Most likely, this was done by the guy who is hiding behind the bishop's back. Xi Wei Jinshi remembered that the Templar Knights are very powerful and mysterious, and they are said to have very powerful strength. Well, it's not surprising that the pastor of the church decided not to listen to him. It turns out that he is definitely supported by some kind of Knight Templar. The young lord turned to Bishop Malton and said that he and his pastor had openly disobeyed the order without any regrets. And according to the laws of the Cologne Empire, Lord Xi Wei has the right to execute him. So he is given the last word in his life. The bishop spoke for the first time and said that in fact he had asked his subordinate for healing, and he doesn't think His Majesty will be against it. Brandishing his sword, which gave off a yellow light, the young lord replied that in that case, there was no need for the existence of this church. Xi Wei Jinshi called Clermont and said he was in charge of the black robe. The latter bowed in return. After making sure that everyone was listening to him, the young lord ordered everyone to listen to his order, and he said to kill every single one. Lord Xi rushed towards the bishop, but then a knight got out from behind him and Clement got out to meet him. He told the killer hiding his face that he would become his opponent, and they fought in a fight. Meanwhile, the bishop's hat flew off his head and he was pinned to the door, on which there was even a large dent. The gray-haired man asked young Lord Xi Wei if he was sure he should insult the priest. He'll never forgive a guy for that. The blonde man stood over him and said that the man cries to his master every day, so why hasn't he helped him yet? The bishop raised his head up. Large and red scratches and bruises were clearly visible on his cheekbone. God will punish this guy. But Xi Wei Jinshi cheekily replied that he would look forward to this day. Bishop Malton began to pray while being stabbed with a sword. The humble servant of God Malton decided to give up his weak soul and become his faithful assistant. Then there was a bright flash. The Lord had to cover himself with his hands. The feeling of oppression, from which it is so difficult to get rid of. This is the will of the flame. Looking at the fact that the scarlet light was making its way up, Xi Wei thought, did Malton have time to make a call? When the young man tried to move, he suddenly realized that it was not working, and a trickle of blood poured out of his mouth. Turning back, he saw that Clermont was fighting with someone. The Lord did not understand what was happening to him. Black Mantle is much weaker than Clermont, so how did this opponent manage to dominate him? Gathering his thoughts, the Lord suddenly thought, is he really going to die here, in this church? Lord Xi Wei Jinshi was squatting on his haunches, looking at his hands, which were shining blue, and did not understand what it was. This strange phenomenon felt very pleasant, and the last burning sensation surprisingly passed quickly, and the wound also healed quickly. The young man chuckled. Does this mean that God is covering for him? At this time, Clement was still fighting with the black cloak. He couldn't understand why he couldn't defeat the opponent. He was being sarcastic and asked the old man, does he really think that he will succeed at least? He just needs to accept his imminent death, that's all. Don't try to jump over your head and beat him. They fought for some more time, and then Black Cloak noticed that it seemed that Malton's strength was not enough to defeat the new lord. Still, it wasn't worth relying on him. Abandoning all attempts to defeat the enemy, Clement apologized to the lord, because his humble servant failed. The blonde guy said not to blame himself, because that guy is clearly special, so don't underestimate him. He doesn't seem to be susceptible to pain at all. A pathetic murder weapon created by the Holy See. He can't even call a man a man. Very interesting. It turns out that the guy knows a lot about the secrets of the Holy See. But unfortunately, the more you know, the closer death is. A huge werewolf with red eyes suddenly appeared in front of the young lord. It seems that the Holy See's methods are more perverted than they could have imagined. Xi Wei Jinshi started scanning the information about this werewolf. His name was Carter, temporarily distraught. The personality is a Knight Templar. The strength is a rider of level 44, and the motto is without details. It seems that his transformation into a werewolf is temporary. That is, they still have time. The young master told his faithful servant that the madness of this wolf is limited in time, and therefore they still have a chance to defeat him. The young Lord Xi Wei Jinshi leapt up high to attack the wolf, while holding his sword at the ready. He made a fearless dash forward, but the werewolf was able to fight off with his paws. Everything seemed to be on fire, and the werewolf noticed out of the corner of his eye that another person was approaching him from behind. It was Clement. The werewolf tried to fend them off as if they were annoying insects, because people were much smaller than himself. Xi Wei realized that there was no way to wait any longer, and the more the madness was wasted, the worse it would be for them. The wolf growled and threw the lord back a little with one paw, and knocked out his faithful servant with the other. The man was sitting in some debris and breathing convulsively, trying to get some rest from such a strong grip. The werewolf approached Xi Wei and grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. For him, the boy had no weight. He had originally planned to betray them to his highness, but now he changed his mind. He'll just eat them. The wolf had already opened its mouth, where there were many sharp teeth and fangs, but the young lord was not afraid at all. He waited with a calm face until the beast got close enough to him, and then just punched him right in the jaw. The question was whether the wolf would be able to eat him. The werewolf didn't understand how it happened. Has the power of madness already run out? Xi Wei Jinshi was able to break free from his strong grip and stepped on top with his feet. Xi Wei's technique is not just a crystal spell, but a skill that prevents the passage of time. No wonder it didn't work out. The werewolf realized that the guy was a real scoundrel. With one swing of the sword, Xi Wei was able to chop off the head of the beast, and it flew away from the body. He, a servant of God, will be able to lead an honest life only after death. Putting the sword blade down, the blonde leaned on its handle and exhaled wearily. Finally, this long and hard fight is over. But then he suddenly remembered that his servant was under the rubble. Calling his knights to get the poor man out of the rubble, he asked them to ask the priest to cure Clermont as soon as possible. But his personal bodyguard replied to the young gentleman that there were no more priests here, because the Lord ordered to kill every single one. That's why there was no one left anymore. The bodyguard pointed to the cold bodies of all the bishops who were lying on the ground in their beautiful robes, but they were all missing one body part. The Lord did not expect that they would kill as many as 6. Putting his hand to his head in frustration, he ordered the bodyguard to go to his office and bring out a bottle of life for Clermont. But the rest need to search the temple and transport all valuables to his home. There was still an acute shortage of people in Winterhold. While all his subjects were working hard, the young Lord Xi Wei Jinshi stood biting his finger in a snow-white glove, which he surprisingly never gets dirty, and thought that he would soon have to go to his other territories to capture the priests. Normally, he definitely wouldn't have put so much strain on it. One of his knights abruptly stopped near the guy, breathing loudly, and informed the gentleman that they had found some kind of basement. The Lord did not understand what was so shocking about him, since he came running with such wild eyes. Very nervous, the knight said that the situation was not easy, because the young gentleman needed to see for himself. Later, the man led him to the basement, lighting the way with one handheld flashlight. Having opened the right door, an unpleasant smell immediately hit the young man's nose. And then he looked around and saw just piles of corpses of inhumans. They were piled on top of each other, and the picture was just terrible. The lanterns fell out of his hands from shock. The knight, who was standing slightly behind the Lord, could not stand such a stench and threw up a little to the side. However, the Lord himself behaved quite calmly. He looked around and noticed a white letter on the shelf. Opening it, he saw that it was addressed to the Pope, and it said that Malton sends his regards. The blood for the ceremony has already been prepared, and will soon be sent to the capital. The rest of the blood bags were well hidden, but if necessary, you can get them at any time. Malton would also like to ask Dad to transfer Carter, because he turned out to be a very good guardian. However, it turned out that he is mentally unwell, and most likely, he needs support. Malton sincerely hopes that the Pope will not refuse to help him. Xi Wei Jinshi realized that the people from the Holy See had already gone completely crazy. Apparently, some kind of ceremony is coming, for which the blood of inhumans is needed. That's why they needed these girls. It feels like it's all controlled by a pair of dirty dark hands. But why do they need inhumans? Is this the same person who wants to implement the slavery convention? Is it true that the Cologne Empire attacked the Principality of Inhumans only because of the sudden outbreak of the Divine War? The Lord shook his head from side to side, trying to tear himself away from these thoughts. He doesn't want to think about anything like that anymore. Now he's completely safe, even though he hasn't figured out his problems yet. Does he have time to solve Empire issues? Some time later, Lord Xi Wei Jinshi was sitting in his office in Winterhold at night. He looked at the gold coins that were scattered on the table and thought, did Malton really have only a few gold coins behind his soul? Isn't that crazy? Returning to his bedroom, the blonde man yawned and went to his big and soft bed, because sleep was above all. However, he immediately noticed that there was someone under his snow-white blanket. The young lord abruptly tore off the blanket and ordered the stranger out of there. However, Lori was lying on his bed, which somehow turned out to be there. One was intoxicated and drooling from the mouth. She looked at him with bleary eyes and was more than ever glad that her master had finally returned home. She sat up and rubbed one eye and said she was here to help warm his bed. Lord thought, and this is what Chris taught her. The guy sat down on the edge of the bed, turned his back to her and said that she could massage his shoulders, because he was terribly tired for the whole day. The girl immediately agreed and sat down closer. He suddenly noticed something fluffy near him, touched it with his hand and asked what it was, but Lori immediately asked him not to touch it. Some trinkets fell out of her fluffy tail and she had to admit that this was all she managed to pick up and stock up. Among the little things were bows, leaves, sweets. Lori is a real squirrel, and she was able to hide so many things. But judging by the expression on her face, she is afraid that the Lord will take her treasures from her. And she also has a huge red bow, and the Lord said that she can use it as a kind of pocket. And if she has found something valuable and really wants to keep it, then there is no need to hide it in her tail. Lori threw herself into the blonde's arms and sincerely thanked him. Then she said it was late enough and asked me to let her take care of him. Chris would be pleased with the results of the little student. A little later, Lord decided to ask Lori how old she was, and she replied that according to human chronology she was already 18, and so 16. Half humans come of age at 14. The young gentleman was very happy that she was already of age. Legal Lola. The system made itself felt by sending an alert. The fact is that the system detected the release of hormones into the blood and an increase in heart rate. It is assumed that the host is preparing for the breeding process. Taking into account all the females with whom the owner has recently contacted, it is assumed that the owner reacts to the maid Lori in this way. But there is a warning. Lori is physically weak, and if she is forcibly forced into actions of this kind, it can cause irreparable damage to her. We need to find out what the problem is, and then improve Lori's condition before continuing. Lord Xi Wei curled up on the bed while Lori hesitated and said that she hadn't finished warming the bed yet. Miss Chris told her that she still had to hug him. At this time, the blonde was tormented by different feelings: guilt, conscience, morality, reason. The guy squeezed out that she must have just made a mistake. That'll do for him, too. After lying on the bed until morning, without closing his eyes, the guy asked the system where his reward was. After analyzing that the owner has completed all 3 villainous daily tasks, he can play the lottery again and get prizes. When the roulette stopped spinning, the system congratulated the guy that he had received 10 Tauran warriors, and his reward would be sent to him in the very near future. Therefore, the owner needs to prepare everything in an open area for their arrival. This lot is not epic, so it does not start the wheel again. The system then wished the Lord that his luck had never left him. It seemed that the young man was upset that he failed to make the second twist. But even so, he shouldn't be upset because now he has warriors. The elite soldiers of the Orc Empire, born and hardened in battle, are in no way inferior to the Crusaders of the Cologne Empire. They are equal in strength to good warriors. But the young Mr. Xi Wei Jinshi still did not fully understand how the rational allocation of resources in this way still happens. Suddenly, a blue light suddenly appeared in the gentleman's room, from which someone's silhouette was visible, and he certainly did not expect to see this in the morning.